Hey besties, I'll be so happy if I'm able to finish making this video because I feel so sick, but I just need to make this video. Don't worry, I'm fine. I need to say that just in case my energy is not as hyper as it normally would be. I've gotten so many DMs about social work interview at the University of Lincoln because as I've gathered, next week is going to be the interview and people are wondering, so what should they prepare for? But I've made a video about social work, and in that video I talked about everything about social work, and I briefly mentioned interview, but I did not go in depth, and I think that's the reason why lots of people want to still know more about interview, and that's why I'm making this video. Hopefully I'm able to finish the video. Although the University of Lincoln is not a standard, I think this video will be beneficial to anyone still looking into becoming a social work master student regardless of the institution. Now, the first thing I would say to you is just calm down. Literally, just calm down. Because you being in a relaxed state of mind will do you a lot of good. For you to have gotten at the interview stage, that means you are almost there, literally. And this is because British people don't waste their time. They don't have time to waste. If you are at the interview stage, then that means most likely would have applied to other schools and you most likely have been rejected, because as I said, these schools don't like wasting their time. So once you don't meet their requirement, or for whatever reason you don't just meet it, they don't give you the admission, they reject you immediately. But once they've called you for an interview, that is an amazing news, because that means you are well on your way to actually getting the offer. So calm down, you've got this. I know that for some people, imposter syndrome may want to make them feel so overwhelmed, but I'm here to tell you that, see, relax, calm down, it's going to be all right. I am the most unqualified person to talk about this, and yet I am talking about it. And the reason why I call myself the most unqualified person is because I've shared it before and I'll still keep sharing it. My my entry into social work department was just a miracle, literally, because before entering I knew absolutely nothing about social work. I knew nothing about being a social worker, and here I am. And that's just because I educated myself, and not only did I educate myself, I had a very relaxed, calm and confident aura, and that's reflected in the interview. I'm here to tell you that your interviewer is not there to fail you. They are not there to look at the bad things you want to say. No, they're actually there to support you. And if you have this mentality that they're here to support you, you are going to have an amazing interview session because you're going to be relaxed. I remember some mistakes I made when I was in my interview session, and I still got in. I researched about social work like some days to my interview and I was confident, but I still made some mistakes. For instance, I was trying to talk about British Association of Social Work, which is something I'm going to talk about in this video. And I mistakenly talked about NASWA instead of BASWA, and NASWA pertains to the Americans. But guess what? The interviewer just corrected me because it's not a do or die thing. And the reason I'm mentioning this thing is to tell you that, see, don't be scared. Just go there being confident, because they are not there to fail you. They want you there. There is a slot for you. And for them to have gone through the hassles of giving you an interview, then there is actually a slot for you, and you should be very confident in your abilities. If you have gotten an interview date, you did this, and you can actually continue in this. Don't let any form of limitations prevent you from actually getting that offer. So now that that is done, let's talk about the interview proper. Now, for the University of Lincoln, my interview was in 2 stages. The first is the group interview. Second was an individual interview. I feel like the group interview is way more important than the individual interview, but the group interview is just to test how well you work in a group, because for the group interview you'll be in a group. For me, I didn't even attend a group interview and I got in, because the individual interview is where they actually test you, your intellect, your experience and all that. Now, various schools would have their various interview methods. There are some schools that would tell you should have a written interview at first, then later an oral interview. So it just depends on your school. But now I'm going to focus on the individual interview. But before we do that, please, if you are in a place where the network is not good, please move away from that place. Try your best to ensure that you have an amazing internet service, because for some reason, that day when you need internet the most, you could be disappointed. So ensure that you have enough data. Ensure that your network is very strong, because I had that issue. My network started fluctuating, but I thank God it happened towards the end of my interview, so they had already gotten the main point they wanted to get, and that was it. So put that in mind. Now let's talk about the interview questions itself. Of course, I may not be able to remember all the questions I was asked, but I will tell you the ones I can remember. So of course, the first is maybe meet you and you introduce yourself. And whilst introducing yourself, see, in everything you are saying, ensure you are very strategic and calculative. Anything you're saying should reflect the fact that you'll be an amazing social worker. So tell me about yourself is not the time to just tell them about yourself without talking about yourself professionally with respect to social work. So you just have to find a way to infuse how great you would be as a social worker. Now, another question they asked me is, what are the qualities of a good social worker? And this is something that you can get the answers to just by researching. But I would always say that some things you must always say when you are doing your social work interview is critical thinking. You think critically. You are empathetic. That is very important. Don't leave your interview without mentioning empathy. Don't leave your interview without mentioning active listening skills, because as a social worker, you're not just going to be a listener, you must be an active listener. And there's a difference between being a listener and an active listener. You can make a research on that. Also, mention about the fact that you have emotional intelligence. Mention the fact that you are resilient, because those are skills that you need as a good social worker. So for me, after asking about the skills that every good social worker should have, they also asked the skills I had that would make me a good social worker. And that was an easy question for me, because I could easily relate it to my personal skills. And ensure that when you're saying all the skills, you actually know what you're saying, because you may be called upon to give examples or instances where you've demonstrated those skills, and you have to be able to actually say important things. Now, something else they asked before I forget is, what are the legislations guiding social work practice? And you have to know this through reading, through research, and it's not too late to make a research on that. Now, let me just tell you for free. For social work practice, there is mainly adult social work and children's social work. Now, for adult social work, we have the Care Act, which is a guiding act for that. For children's social work, we have the Children's Act, which is a guiding act for that. Now, the other aspects of social work practice, such as mental health, which is a very big field in social work. For mental health, the legislation guiding it is the Mental Health Act. We also have the Mental Capacity Act. Now, other legislations that are very important for social work practice is the Human Rights Act, very important. Then the Equality Act, which is very, very important. So I want you to familiarize yourself with all these legislations. I'm not saying you should go and start reading the ins and outs of these legislations. It's not important, no. But just know what these legislations are and why they came about. For instance, they asked me a question when I talked about Children Act. They asked me, why do you think Children Act came about? And of course, I didn't even know why Children Act came about, but I just used my common sense and I answered that I think it came about as a result of the fact that the rights of children were not being entrenched, and the government needed to have like a legislation that guided children. That's what I answered. And by the way, besties, you don't have to know the answers to all the questions, but at least you should know the answers to most of the questions. In any case where you don't know the answer to the questions, it is okay to be honest. It actually is. There was a question they asked me in my interview, and I tried to answer it. I didn't know the answer to it, and I actually told them, I'm not so sure if this is the right answer, but I think this is it. And that's what I said when they asked about the purpose of the Children's Act. And that's what I said, and they were actually impressed. So just relax. It's not that deep. Now, one other question they asked me is, how do you cope with stress? That is a very important question, and that is also related to being a resilient person. social work practice can be very demanding, very, very demanding, and you have to know how to handle stress as a social worker. So that's why that question comes about. You have to be resilient as a social worker. Now, they may ask you how you manage stress in your personal life or your professional life, and you have to have answers. They could ask you questions like, what do you do for fun? They are trying to know how you handle stress. So every question they ask you is intentional, and you have to be strategic in your response. So for me, I told them that I handle stress through journaling, which is something very important to me. I talked about the fact that if I have a very rough day, I write down my emotions, I write down how I feel about it, and that helps me. I also told them that I'm big on affirmations. So after I write, I also say things out loud. I talk about how amazing a person I am. I talk about things that uplift me, especially when I've had a very difficult day. And I also told them that I love to meditate. I prioritize having my self-care and meditating throughout that process. And the interviewer seemed very impressed with that. By the way, your interviewer should be just one person, and that's just that. Another question they asked me was, describe an occasion where you worked with a team and there was conflict, but you were able to navigate that conflict. I gave an example of sometime when I was at work and there was a very huge conflict, and I was able to stand my ground because what my co-workers were trying to do was going to be against the company's policy, and I stood my ground. Of course, at that instant, it created some form of conflict or tension. However, I have healthy boundaries and I was able to be assertive, and that conflict was resolved. So basically, you should always have some of these situations or scenarios at your beck and call, so that when they ask you a question, you can easily just give a story, give a scenario, and just link it one way or the other. And that's what I did. Of course, they're definitely going to ask you about your job experience and how you've done things related to social work. And that is your point to sell yourself. Sell yourself as much as you can. Sell yourself. And in case you don't have core experience with social work practice, there are still many ways you can sell yourself. In my other video where I talked about social work practice, I talked about the fact that you should volunteer. If you've not done anything related to social work practice, you should volunteer in hospitals, prison, NGOs, and most of your experiences should stem from that. Especially if you are transitioning from other courses or other career paths to social work practice, you have to show them that you are fit for the role. So you have to give examples of how you did this and you did that in that job position. Another question they may ask you is, what do you know about discrimination? And that is because to be a social worker, you have to be very familiar with discrimination and Equality Act. I mentioned it earlier. The Equality Act is the number one act that guides against discrimination, because in the UK and I think most parts of the Western world, you must never discriminate against anyone by reason of their age, their race, their sex, and various other protected characteristics. That's what it's called. Now you have to show that you will never discriminate against anybody. And I need to talk about my African brothers and sisters, because a lot of us grew up with just one mindset, especially because of sexuality. Because in most African countries, being gay, being a lesbian is an abomination. It's wrong, right? Now, you cannot want to be a social worker and have that mentality, because they will fish you out. You must never discriminate against anybody because of their sexuality. Just the same way we don't want to be discriminated because of our race, you should never do that to somebody. So that's something you should be very careful about. And you should be able to talk about the fact that you are non-judgmental, you are open-minded. You may not agree with everyone's value system, but you are able to respect it. You are able to be respectful to people regardless of how they are or what they believe in. Now, your interviewer can ask you a question that reflects that. For instance, when I was applying into this course, I think it was University of Swansea, they asked a question, and in that question they said, there is this person that is non-binary and the person needs support. How can you support the person? They couched the question like that. And I've been able to assist some people to get into that particular school. And one thing I've told them is, when you see non-binary, they are trying to test whether you are discriminatory or not. Now, when a person is non-binary, the person does not attach themselves to any gender. And you cannot be calling a non-binary person he or she. No. So that's something you have to be particular about. At the very least, you call the person they. So you cannot be saying you're trying to support a non-binary person and you are calling the person she or he. Then you're not supporting the person in a person-centered approach, which is a term that you can use in your interview. You should make your interviewer know that when you're going to support your client, you are going to support them based on their individuality, person-centered. And what that means is, if you're supporting me, Ada, for instance, you are going to support me based on my peculiarities. You're not going to support me the way you support Nkechi or the way you support Kwame. You support me uniquely. So when you're supporting someone that is maybe non-binary or queer or basically someone with a unique characteristics, you have to show that you will not be discriminatory towards them. Another question that they may ask you is, why do you want to become a social worker? So this is a time to also sell yourself. So why do you want to be a social worker? You should have the answer to that question. I don't know your answers. For me, I have always been very passionate about supporting the plight of vulnerable people, and that's just it. And I really want to make an impact in people's lives, and I feel being a social worker would give me that opportunity. Now, you don't have to say that. You may have your own reason, because one thing about these interviews is you have to be unique. You have to be authentic. Everybody should not be saying the same thing. So there must be a reason why you want to be a social worker. I know someone that she wants to be a social worker because she had a very rough childhood. Parents died when she was very young, and she just lived from hand to mouth during her childhood, and that made her have a very soft heart for children, and she wants to go into children's social work. Now, that's her story. So, besties, I know that not everyone may have planned to become social workers, but if you've already found yourself in the field, you have to have a very strong purpose. You should not want to be a social worker because everybody is telling you should be a social worker strategically. You will not last in the field. You have to have a deeper purpose for being a social worker. Just reminds me of me doing this. Like, there are so many things I would rather be doing at this point in time, but there is a deeper purpose why I'm doing all of this, and that's the reason why, come rain, come sunshine, I really need to do this because my heart is here. So that's just that. I wish I could go on and on, but I feel very weak. And let me just tell you some things that I want you to go and make your research on so that you would be an amazing interviewee. Now, before your interview, get your pen and paper and do this assignment for me. Number 1, make a research on social work definition according to the International Federation of Social Workers. They define social work practice, and it is going to be very helpful. And I think you should familiarize yourself with that definition. Another thing I think you should familiarize yourself with is the British Association of Social Workers. That is a professional association of all social workers in the whole of the United Kingdom. So you should familiarize yourself with BASWA. Another thing you should familiarize yourself with is Social Work England. Social Work England is the regulatory body for social workers in England. So you should familiarize yourself with that. Then finally, familiarize yourself with PCF, which is the Professional Capabilities Framework. And that's like a code of conduct that intending social workers should know about. So besties, try to read about those things, but you don't have to read every single detail. Just know a little about every single thing I've mentioned. You don't have to know everything, because sometimes too much information can just make your head bust, especially if you have such a short time. But just know small things about everything, so that when you are talking, they can hear that you know what you are saying. You're not just talking nonsense, and that will make them know that you deserve to have a place in the course. So besties, I wish you the very best. By the way, this is not my regular video, and I just hope you've gotten all the information that I've tried my best to give out. If you've watched this video and you've not watched my video on all about social work, then I'm linking it up, because that's the video that you should watch next. All right besties, I'm going to see you in my next one. Bye guys.